The morning sun reflected like molten gold off the sleek black helicopter resting on the rooftop helipad of Carter Enterprises. The city skyline stretched out endlessly below, a glittering jungle of glass and steel. Elena Carter, 30 years old and already one of the youngest CEOs in the country, strode confidently across the roof, with her heels clicking sharply against the concrete. Her long, tailored coat fluttered in the breeze, her hair perfectly styled to frame her striking face. She exuded power, success, and a touch of arrogance that came with being untouchable in her world. Near the entrance to the building, a man in a simple uniform was sweeping leaves that had blown in overnight. He was broad-shouldered, his dark hair slightly disheveled, and his presence almost invisible to those who walked past him. But when his 8-year-old son, Ethan, ran to bring him a forgotten lunchbox, his stern features softened instantly. He crouched down, ruffled Ethan's hair, and whispered something that made the boy laugh. Elena happened to glance their way, her eyes lingering on the man just long enough to recognize that he wasn't like the other workers. There was a calmness, a confidence in the way he stood, even while holding a broom. She smirked, tossing her hair back, and with a voice loud enough to be heard across the helipad, she said, "Fly this helicopter, and I'll marry you." Her tone was mocking, a playful cruelty wrapped in humor. The other employees laughed awkwardly, unsure whether to join in or look away. The janitor, Daniel Hayes, simply lifted his gaze to her, his expression unreadable. Then he smiled just slightly and returned to sweeping without saying a word. For reasons she couldn't explain, that smile unsettled her more than any witty comeback could have. Elena Carter lived in a penthouse that seemed to pierce the sky itself. Her nights were filled with champagne toasts at charity galas, her days with endless meetings about mergers, acquisitions, and billion-dollar projects. She had the attention of powerful men, the envy of ambitious women, and the loyalty of thousands of employees. Yet in her quiet moments when she walked through her empty apartment and stared at the city lights, loneliness gnawed at her like an uninvited guest she couldn't evict. Daniel Hayes, by contrast, lived in a modest 2-bedroom apartment a few blocks from Ethan's school. His mornings began with packing lunches, tying shoelaces, and making sure homework was tucked safely into a backpack. His evenings were filled with laughter, burned pancakes, and bedtime stories about dragons and faraway kingdoms. Money was tight, but love filled the small space until it overflowed. The irony wasn't lost on Daniel. Once upon a time, he had lived in a world closer to Elena's luxury, status, and danger. But that life had ended. The day tragedy ripped his family apart. He had chosen obscurity, chosen to trade adrenaline for the simple rhythm of fatherhood. And yet, every time he walked past the gleaming helicopter perched above the skyscraper, a part of his soul ached with recognition. Elena, meanwhile, found herself thinking about him far more often than she expected. The memory of his quiet smile unchallenged, unbothered by her mockery, replayed in her mind during meetings and late-night drives. Who was this janitor who didn't flinch, who didn't bow, who carried himself like someone who knew a truth the rest of the world had missed? The first clue came weeks later. Elena had just returned from a tense board meeting when alarms blared through the building. A delivery drone had malfunctioned near the helipad, spinning out of control. Panic erupted among employees as sparks flew and metal shards scattered across the rooftop. Before anyone could react, Daniel was there. He moved with precision, grabbing a fire extinguisher, pulling a young intern to safety, and securing the area with swift commands that even security guards instinctively obeyed. When a flaming fragment threatened to set a fuel line ablaze, he acted without hesitation, rolling across the ground, cutting a wire, and neutralizing the danger with movements too sharp, too practiced to belong to a simple janitor. Elena watched in shock. It wasn't just bravery, it was training. Military training. When the chaos subsided, Daniel dusted off his uniform and returned to his broom as if nothing had happened. Elena approached him later, curiosity burning in her chest. "You don't strike me as the type of man who spends his life sweeping floors," she said. Daniel's response was simple. "Sometimes life decides for you." Then he gave her the same half-smile as before and walked away. It was infuriating and intoxicating. A week after the rooftop scare, Carter Enterprises was bracing for war. Vantage X, a ruthless competitor, had undercut Elena's team on a defense tech contract that would determine the company's trajectory for years. The project, codenamed Aurora, paired Carter's analytics platform with a lightweight reconnaissance helicopter fleet for disaster response and border surveillance. The contract wasn't just revenue, it was legacy. If Carter lost, the board would start murmuring that Elena's meteoric rise had outpaced her judgment. The meeting room windows framed a city bruised by storm clouds. Slides flashed timelines, failure points, contingency plans, while Elena's lieutenants fought in polite corporate tones that sounded like clinking glasses. "We have to show presence at the regional summit," said Mark, her COO. "Face to face with the procurement council. Close it in the room. They'll be at Trail Point Airfield for the UAV demos," added Priya, her chief engineer. "We need the helicopter there. Preferably you, Elena." Elena tried to suppress the clench in her chest. She flew often, but helicopters still awakened something primal: spinning rotors, exposed glass, the sensation of hanging by physics and faith. It wasn't fear. It was the feeling of surrendering control, and Elena had built her identity on never doing that. "Fine," she said, crisp. "We deploy Helix 04. Pilot roster? Elliot and Swan," Mark replied. "Best team we've got." Elena's gaze flicked. Just once, toward the security footage, still paused on her laptop from the drone incident, the frame where a man in a janitor's uniform moved like a blade. She closed the lid. Focus. At ground level, the building breathed different air. The revolving doors hissed, the marble floors shone, and Daniel's broom made a quiet shush against stone. He noticed the extra security badges, the hush of urgency as executives hustled by. He noticed, too, the way Elena passed center of gravity slightly forward, like a runner about to launch into a sprint. At lunch, Ethan sketched helicopters on scrap paper at a corner table in the lobby cafe. Daniel watched, amused. "Why do you always draw them nose down?" Daniel asked. "Because it looks like they're brave," Ethan said, as if it were obvious. "Brave can also look level," Daniel answered. "Sometimes the bravest thing is steady." Ethan raised an eyebrow, the expression he'd inherited from his mother. "Is that something you learned in the army?" Daniel's hand paused on his coffee cup. "Something like that." That night, when the building slept, Daniel stood alone on the loading dock and watched clouds climb the spine of the skyscrapers. He'd built a life on routines. Early mornings, school drop-offs, late shifts, burnt pancakes, whispered prayers to a woman he still spoke to in the dark. He had no intention of stepping back into skies that had taken almost everything from him. But sometimes the sky stepped down to find you. 2 days later, on the roof, Helix 04 hummed awake like a predatory insect. The pilots, Elliot and Swan, checked lists with ritual precision. Elena arrived in a navy suit, hair tied back, expression carved from steel. She nodded to the crew, climbed aboard, and strapped in. On the far side of the helipad, Daniel paused with a coil of safety tape in his hands. Their eyes met for a second. Elena felt the phantom of that mocking sentence move through her, a teenage dare thrown off a cliff. "Fly this helicopter, and I'll marry you." He had smiled then. He didn't smile now. The rotors blurred into a disk. The city fell away. 30 minutes into the flight, the world went wrong. They were crossing a corridor of coastal wind that turned the air into invisible knuckles. The Helix bucked. Elliot adjusted, steady hands on the cyclic. Voice even. Swan called out crosswind speeds. Elena held the armrest and pretended her pulse was not a drum. Then the annunciator lit hide press low. A tremor ran through the controls. The pedals went soft, like standing on a rug that had turned to water. Elliot's posture changed by degrees. Hydraulic failure. Switching to backup. A beat. The light didn't die. He swallowed. Backup isn't engaging. A silence fell inside the rush of turbine and wind. Elena understood enough to know the difference between turbulence and impending catastrophe. Without hydraulics, the pilot wrestles the machine barehanded, every vibration amplified. Every lever, a stubborn animal. They turned. The Helix dipped. The world rotated sea to horizon to sky. "Mayday, Mayday," Swan radioed. "Helix 04. Declaring an emergency. Returning to base. Hydraulic system failure. Backup inoperative. Maintain attitude. Elliot muttered. The stick fought him like a spring coiled too tight. Sweat broke along his hairline. He glanced back at Elena. We'll get you home. The city grew too fast in the windows. The building that held the helipad rose in the windshield like a wall. On the roof, ground crew scrambled, clearing the perimeter. Mark burst from the stairwell, face pale. Priya calculated something you couldn't see the line where lift becomes gravity's confession. Daniel stepped into the gale of rotor wash and felt it pass through him familiar as a scar. He grabbed a headset from a stunned technician. This is ground, he said. Helix 04. Say status. Swan's voice crackled. Hydraulics gone. Manual reversion. Controls stiff. Pilot fatigue rising. End. Copy. Daniel's tone didn't change. Listen to me. Slow the roll with collective, not stick. Trim forward, not back, trust the nose. Don't chase the yaw, anticipate. Think like it's a heavy door you're pushing with your shoulder. There was a pause. Who is this? Elliot demanded, more breath than voice. Someone who's done this before, Daniel answered. He looked at the pad slick with mist. A crosshair painted on concrete. You've got one chance. Fly the profile for an elevated pad. No hover. Shallow approach. Commit. In the cockpit, Elena watched the pilots look at each other and realized that there was no better idea. Elliot's arms trembled with static effort. The machine shuddered, complaining. Helix, your approach is high. A tower controller warned from a safe distance. High is better than dead, Elliot muttered. Helix, Daniel said, quiet. Breathe. Don't fight the wobble. Damp it. Count it like a metronome. 3, 2, 1. Now. Elliot adjusted. The wobble lessened by a hair. They cleared the parapet with inches to spare. The pad slid under them. Elliot began to flare instinct and training, seeking the comfort of a hover. Don't you hover, Daniel's voice cut through. Commit. Keep forward motion. Don't stall the disc. Elliot committed. The skids met concrete with a screech. The helicopter slid. Nose canted. The tail swung wide, an arc of metal aiming toward the safety rails and open air. Elliot yanked pedal, both hands white. The world narrowed to physics and prayer. Left pedal now. Collective now. The tail straightened by degrees. The skids bit into friction paint and, mercifully, stopped. For a second, no one moved. The engine whined down slowly, like a beast deciding not to bite. Then doors opened, hands reached, and Elena stumbled onto solid ground with legs that didn't belong to her. She turned. Through the heat haze, she saw Daniel lower the headset and set it carefully on a crate, as if it were something fragile. When she reached him, she didn't speak. He nodded once. The smallest acknowledgement between people who had both just looked at the edge and stepped back. They met in her office after the debrief, a room of glass and soft light where expensive art pretended the world was simple. Elena poured water, but didn't drink it. You were giving flight commands, she said. Not guesses. When did you fly? Daniel didn't sit. A lifetime ago. Elena waited. He looked out over the city as if it were a map of routes only he could see, and then turned back. I was Army Aviation, Kiowa Warriors. Later, Rotary for a federal SAR unit. My wife was a paramedic. We met on a medevac drill where she out. Argued 3 sergeants and stole my sandwich. Elena felt the angle of his story shift before it did. We married young, he continued. We tried to wait for a safer time to start a family, but war doesn't keep calendars. Ethan was born anyway, 2 months early. Strong. Loud. The best reason to run faster. He breathed once, slow. 3 years later, there was a wildfire in the canyons. She volunteered for an evac convoy when a bridge collapsed. I was airborne, ferrying crews. We had her on the radio for a while. Calm. Brave. The last thing she said was my name. The room held the words like glass holds a crack. I left aviation after that, he said. I could still fly, but I couldn't land anywhere that felt like home. So I chose a life with fewer spinning blades. I chose Ethan. Elena's throat worked. And this job? Why here? Steady pay, health insurance. Swing shifts so I can make school pickup. And he hesitated, then offered the final untidy truth. The helipad is noise therapy. Exposure. I'd rather hear rotors on my terms than wake up to them in a dream. Elena set the water down. She thought of her own ghosts. Quieter. Maybe. But insistent. A father who taught her to negotiate at the dinner table. A mother who taught her to put steel in her spine and keep delicate things hidden. Wins and losses that she wore like jewelry, because that was what people expected. I said something cruel to you, Elena managed. On the roof. I thought it was witty. I'm sorry, Daniel's mouth tilted. I've been called worse by better-dressed people. Her laugh came out a little broken. Do you ever miss it? Flying. He didn't answer immediately. Missing is the wrong word. It's like standing in a tide you thought had let you go. Some days the water is level with your ankles. Some days it takes you by the chest. Elena nodded. There was a long quiet that wasn't empty. When he turned to leave, she said, We're going to Trail Point tomorrow. I don't trust the mechanical gremlins anymore. Would you ride along? In the cabin. Not the cockpit. Just eyes. He paused. I sweep floors, Miss Carter. You saved my life today, she said. Consider it overtime. He almost smiled. I'll have to ask HR about the helicopter rider clause. HR will survive, Elena replied. I'm not sure I would without you. Trail Point Airfield was a blister of asphalt in a valley of sunburnt grass. Vendors lined the tarmac with agile drones, camera gimbals, and glossy brochures that promised safety with fonts too cheerful for the subject. The Procurement Council mingled military uniforms, civil defense officials, men in suits with handshakes calibrated to imply sincerity. Carter's booth was an island of understated confidence. Priya showcased live telemetry on a minimalist screen, while technicians prepped Helix 04, now fully inspected and cleared. Elena moved through conversations like a dancer who knew every step. She was charming when charm would suffice, surgical when it wouldn't. Mark handled the handshakes. Elena handled the rooms. Daniel stood at the edge of the tarmac with a reflective vest he hadn't asked for. He didn't belong among the banners and lapel pins. He watched the wind, not the flags that indicated it, and the people who watched everything but thought they were watching the machines. During the demo circuit, Helix 04 climbed cleanly and banked over the hills. Daniel tracked its path by instinct more than sight. When the helicopter returned for a low pass, he noticed a hesitation. A hitch in the rotor beat out of sync with the engine's song. Subtle, but when you've flown machines that sing for a living, you hear when they clear their throat. He moved toward the maintenance tent. Who signed off the pump manifold? He asked a surprised tech. Swan checked blue tags. We swapped the secondary servo block after yesterday's test. From where? Spare kit delivered this morning. Daniel's hands found the crate. He examined the foam cutouts, the seal, the serials. Something was wrong, not the numbers, but the absence of the gauze pad that usually sat between parts to prevent abrasion. The foam edges were rough, cut with a duller blade than the factory used. He pulled the block. Turned it. There, the faintest scuff near a valve seat. An imperfection that would pass initial inspection, behave under light load, and fail under stress. He straightened and scanned the vendors. His gaze settled on a man at the VantageX booth, a contractor with a badge that belonged to someone else, and boots that did not match the scuffs on his briefcase. The man felt the look and turned away. Daniel returned to Priya and Elena. He talked quickly. Sentence blades, counterfeit part, staged failure, plausible deniability. Priya's face went incandescent. Elena didn't blink. Can you prove it? She asked. Daniel held up the servo block. Not before the council votes, but we can refuse to demo this unit. Or, he looked up at the circling helix, we can fly it our way, right now, and make it undeniable. Elena weighed it. Her brand was precision, not spectacle. But the world had shifted under her feet twice in 2 days. And she had learned that indecision was also a decision. "We'll show them," she said. "We'll show them exactly how hard it is to fake competence." When Helix 04 landed, Elena approached Elliot privately. "One more run," she said. "My terms. Ma'am, with respect." "With respect," she said softly. "You almost died with me yesterday. We'll do this safely. Daniel will ride right seat and call the profile. You fly, or I'll scrub the demo and let Vantage X claim we're afraid." Elliot opened his mouth, closed it, and finally nodded. "Right seat's yours," he told Daniel. "No," Daniel said. "I'll stand behind you. I'm not your ghost. I'm your echo." They lifted into a sky that had learned not to trust them. On the downwind leg, Daniel watched pressure needles, listened to the vibration like a mechanic listens to a cough. At the turn to base, he felt the telltale shiver, a resonance that feeds itself if you pretend not to hear. He tapped Elliot's shoulder and pointed at the reading that lay just inside normal. "Don't baby it," Daniel said in the pilot's ear. "Nurse it. There's a difference." He directed a slow, precise landing that highlighted the control margins the way a healthy system responds, and a compromised one hesitates. He asked for maneuvers that looked gentle but forced the valves to reveal their laziness. On the apron, with officials watching, he had Priya wheel the telemetry cart to the audience and overlay the data with baseline signatures from last month's tests. The variance painted itself on screen like a confession. A procurement officer approached with eyebrows canted in interest and alarm. "Are you demonstrating the helicopter?" he asked Elena. "Or your company's ability to catch what others miss?" "Both," Elena said. Her smile, a scalpel. Later, security detained the contractor with the borrowed badge as he tried to leave. In his briefcase, they found a toolkit and a second servo block with the same imperfect scuff insurance. In case the first gambit failed, by sunset the council had delayed their decision. By sunrise, after watching the footage and reviewing the telemetry, they awarded Aurora to Carter. In the official statement, they mentioned technical diligence, operational transparency, and demonstrated safety culture. In every whisper that followed, they mentioned something else, that when trouble found Carter, Carter found a way to land. After the summit, Elena disappeared for a day. Not the public kind of disappearing, with politely leaked rumors of rest, but the private kind, where a person unplugs the lines that hold them upright and asks whether the bones can stand on their own. She called Daniel that evening and asked if she could bring dinner. It wasn't a command. It was a question shaped like humility. He opened the door to the modest apartment and the smell of garlic bread. Ethan ran to greet her with the frank curiosity of children and the cautious loyalty of those who have watched adults be careless with promises. They ate spaghetti on mismatched plates, while a cartoon murmured in the background. Elena listened to Ethan's opinions on which dinosaur would most likely survive a helicopter crash. None, but the ones that could swim would have a better chance, obviously. She laughed more than the dinner warranted. She stayed longer than propriety required. After Ethan fell asleep on the couch, she and Daniel stepped into the hallway so their voices wouldn't wake him. The corridor light hummed. "Congratulations on the contract," Daniel said. "You did that, not the telemetry." "I had help," Elena answered. "You, Priya. Half the shop floor. That's what I keep forgetting when I start thinking I'm bulletproof." He shrugged. "Bullets don't care what you think." She leaned against the wall. "When I mocked you, it wasn't really about you." She exhaled. "It was about my fear of falling from a height I was sure I'd earned. I saw someone who looked rooted to the ground and I mistook that for smallness." He considered this. "Roots don't make trees small. They make them hard to blow over." She met his eyes. "You keep saying things like that, and people are going to think you read poetry on your smoke break." "I read the backs of cereal boxes and field manuals," he said. "And books I don't admit to owning." They stood like that for a while. Two people who had shared adrenaline, and now had to learn how to share the quieter things. Air, silence, the awareness that their orbits had shifted and were tugging them into a new geometry. "About the sentence I said," Elena whispered at last. "The dare. "Fly this helicopter and I'll marry you," he repeated, not unkindly. She nodded. When I said it, it was a knife thrown at the floor to look brave. After this week, it feels like a promise I don't know how to keep. He didn't move closer. He didn't move away. "I won't take a promise you made to a different version of me," he said. "Or a different version of you." The hum of the light filled the space between them. "What if we start smaller?" she said. "Like coffee that doesn't taste like battery acid. And a rule that if one of us hears the rotors get too loud inside, we tell the other." "That," he said, "I can keep." Ethan stirred and mumbled in his sleep. They went back in. Elena tucked a blanket around the boy with a competence that surprised her. She had spent her life tucking numbers into cells and signatures onto lines. The softness of fabric felt like a new language. On her way out, she paused at the threshold. "Trail run tomorrow," she said. "We're taking Helix for a victory lap in front of the crew. You don't have to come." "I know," he said. "Will you?" He thought of wind and steel, and the woman who had learned to say "I'm sorry" like an act of will. Yes. The crew gathered on the rooftop under a sky as clear as a newly cleaned window. Priya handed out paper cups of terrible coffee and made a speech about redundant systems and non-negotiable standards that made 2 interns cry in a good way. Mark talked about market share. Nobody listened. Elena said very little. She walked around the helicopter, hand trailing along its skin, aware of Daniel's presence as one is aware of the edge of a cliff, not an invitation to fall, but a reminder to look at the view with respect. Before boarding, she turned to the crew. "We don't win because we're the smartest," she said. "We win because when something is wrong, someone speaks. And when someone speaks, someone listens." There were nods, some skeptical, some sincere. Elliot flew a clean circuit. On the return, Elena asked to take the controls for 30 seconds, just a gentle, supervised hold. He hesitated, then yielded. Hands hovering ready, she held the cyclic with the delicate terror of a violinist touching a borrowed Stradivarius. The machine translated her small intentions into motion. For the first time in a long time, she felt a thing she couldn't name. Maybe trust, maybe humility. Maybe the knowledge that control isn't the opposite of surrender, but its partner in a dance. When they landed, the cheer that went up wasn't loud. It was honest. Daniel stood at the edge of the pad with his vest, and the way he avoided applause. Elena walked to him, took a breath, and said, "Thank you. For every time you chose steady over brave." He tilted his head. "You flew," he said. "That's brave enough." "Stay a minute," she said. "I want to show you something." They walked to the parapet where the city flared in late morning light. Traffic stitched moving seams through the streets. Tiny lives, immense stakes. She told him about the night she was appointed CEO and realized her first decision would be to cut a division that had promised her they'd turn around, and the man who ran it had known her since she was 18. She told him about winning the vote and losing a friend. About the father who clapped her shoulder and said, "That's leadership," when what she had wanted was for him to say, "That must have hurt." Daniel listened the way pilots listen to weather and to warnings, to the sky and the instrument that says the sky is lying. When she finished, he didn't offer advice. He offered presence. "Okay," she said finally, wiping a laugh that wasn't quite laughter from her mouth. "One more thing." She took a small silver ring from her pocket, not an engagement ring, not anything that carried that weight. A simple band, smooth as a promise you can keep. She set it on the parapet in the sun. "I keep things too tight," she said. "Deals, people, stories about who I am. I want to practice setting something down and not losing it." He understood. He set his badge, the visitor's pass, Priya had printed with the wrong middle initial next to the ring. For a moment, they stood there, not guarding, not gripping, learning the art of letting things stay without your hands on them. "Coffee?" he said at last. "God, yes," she said. They left the ring and the badge on the concrete for the length of a cup. When they returned, both were still there. The sky did not fall. The rotors, somewhere else, spun for other people. Months later, after Aurora had put Carter on the cover of magazines that liked to pretend courage could be photographed, after Priya had built a culture in the shop where even interns could halt a line with one raised word, after Ethan had decided that of all dinosaurs, His father was most like the Ankylosaurus, steady, armored. Surprising when he needed to be, Elena found herself on the roof again at dawn. The city hadn't yet put on its noise. The helicopter rested like a cat, curled on a warm stone. Daniel arrived with 2 coffees that tasted slightly less like battery acid than the last time. They stood side by side, shoulders almost touching, watching the light discover edges on glass. "I thought of a better line," Elena said. "Oh?" he asked. She turned to him, the breeze lifting a strand of hair she didn't bother to tame. "Fly with me," she said, "and I'll learn how to land." He looked at her a long time. Then he held out his hand, not to seal a contract, not to claim a debt, but to accept an invitation. They walked toward the helicopter. They walked toward a life that would ask hard things and offer harder ones. And because neither of them believed in magic that didn't bleed, they understood that this was the work. Not the dare, not the spectacle, but the practice of being steady in a world that insisted on wobbling. Below them, the city began to wake. Above them, the rotors had not yet turned. Between those 2 truths, they stood 2 people who had chosen to change their orbits, and to do it slowly enough that nothing cracked. And that, in the end, was what left her speechless. Not the secret that he had been hiding, but the way he revealed it carefully, like a pilot lowering a bird onto the only patch of earth for miles that would hold. When the engine finally spooled, the sound was no longer a threat. It was a song. They didn't need to say what anyone watching would have misnamed as a vow. They had already started to keep it.